Welcome to the Polygamer podcast, where gaming is for everyone. Join us as we expand the boundaries of the gaming community.
Hello and welcome to the Polygamer podcast, episode number 102 for Wednesday, June 17th, 2020. I'm your host, Ken Gagney. Before we get into this month's interview, I need to acknowledge the protests and civil unrest this country is currently witnessing and the centuries of systemic racism that they are in response to. As a straight white cis man, I have never directly experienced the prejudice and discrimination that so many groups of people do every day throughout our world, in which black people have long been subjected to in the United States. I founded this podcast to use my privilege to help bring attention to these marginalized voices and the obstacles they uniquely must overcome. If you are listening to this podcast, then you are already taking steps to identify and scrutinize your own biases. It's important that we listen to and believe people's stories. But that is only the first step. More than listening, we must also speak up, adding our voices to those striving to cure our country and its soul of this sickness. All our lives depend on it. As Emma Lazarus said, until we are all free, we are none of us free. If it is safe and healthy for you to do so, consider attending a march or a protest. If you are financially secure, donate to a nonprofit. Add your name to a petition. Share on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram your show of support and solidarity, even if you're afraid of what the response might be. Links to all these ways to support the cause can be found at blacklivesmatter.carrd.co. There will also be a link in the show notes found at polygamer.net, where you can also send me an email or voicemail. If you have ideas for guests or causes to support, please let me know. This is not something we are going to solve overnight, but it is something we can solve together. I'm very excited to have a game developer on this month's show. I used to interview a lot of game developers on my other podcast, Indiecider, and this month's game isn't even out yet. It comes out Thursday, June 18th on Steam for Windows and Xbox One. That game is Waking, and I'm super excited today to be talking to the sole designer and developer of Waking, Mr. Jason Oda. Hello, Jason.
Hey, Ken. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
It's such an honor to talk to you. I saw the videos you sent me about Waking. There is a free demo available for Windows. I unfortunately haven't gotten my hands on it since I'm a Mac guy, but I don't take it personally. But for those who haven't gotten to play it, what is Waking?
Okay, so the short pitch of it is in Waking, you play as yourself in a coma. And your weapons against the forces of darkness are the people that you love and your most cherished memories. So basically, as far as how it looks, it's this 3D sort of very beautiful kind of journey-like game. And the levels and gameplay are kind of combat and action-oriented. But at the end of the levels is this sort of really unique part of the game that I think is getting the game a little bit more attention. Basically, you're in this coma and you meet this angel who asks you to literally close your eyes. And she recites this guided meditation that takes you back into your own personal memories from the past. The idea is almost to sort of take the cutscene out of the video game and put it into your own mind's eye with your own memories and personal images and people. And when you're finished with this meditation from this angel, you open your eyes and you answer questions based on this memory that you have just envisioned in your mind. And the way that you sort of answer the questions shapes sort of like the weapons that you have in the game and sort of to some degree changes small aspects of the story. So like the first example of this would be of the first memory that you sort of go through is it's this pet from your childhood. Or if you want to do one, you can do one now. But if you had like this dog or this cat that you really loved when you were a kid, you go through this memory with this angel about it running through the grass or, falling asleep in a pool of sunlight or whatever memory that you have that sort of comes to mind when you imagine this pet. And it, the first day that you had it, maybe the day that it passed away and the life that it spent, the life that it spent with you. And then you answer questions about the pet. You sort of choose from an array of different pet sizes and shapes and cats and dogs and things like that. And you give the actual name of the pet to the pet in the game. And then you have this cat or dog fighting the forces of darkness next to you, barking and meowing and helping you find secret passages and all sorts of stuff like that. Another example would be like a handful of dirt from your hometown that acts as like this projectile. A stuffed animal that you had when you were a kid that removes, some of the powers that other enemies might have. With games that are really personal, it's usually like the story about the dev and something that they've been through or something that they experienced in real life. But with Waking, I wanted to make this game that was actually about like you, the player, and your life and your story and the things that you've seen and the things that are beautiful to you and the things that mean something to you. And, I wanted these to be the sort of like the treasures and the weapons that you're wielding and you're finding within the game. So the goal of Waking, is I really wanted to make what is essentially like, I think like the most personal game that's ever been made.
That is amazing that you would have a game like that where it's not about having an avatar that represents you. It actually is you. And I remember seeing some of those concepts modeled when you demoed the game for Jeff Keighley way back at E3 2017. How long have you been working on Waking?
Waking started kind of officially around 2015. There was this part of the artistic process and part of the developing process where you can really trick yourself into believing that you're 95% of the way done when you're like 50% of the way done. There's something about that last 5% that takes up half the time of development. It just seems so close. And then you don't realize how far you have to go. So it's 2020 now. It's finally coming out. This is, 3 years later. After that release that I had on the E3 with Jeff Keighley, there was another year and a half of work that was solidly going into the game. And then after that, basically it was just held up because we were trying to get the porting just right. And this is like this big, complicated game with like a lot of weird systems, and we had to port it twice. It was kind of like very tricky. And at the same time, I still am like, nipping away at the corners, trying to improve it bit by bit. So finally, summer of 2020, we actually have the game ready to go, working on all the on Xbox. It's finally here. So it's been a long, long time, and I'm really happy that it's finally coming to real life.
And somewhere in that long development period, the name changed from Coma to Waking. Why was that change made?
Yeah, Coma was a bad name because the problem with Coma is there's already this kind of famous Flash game called Coma. And then in the time that I was developing it, these other sort of like Korean games came out called Coma : something, something, something. And it just got to be that there were too many games like about comas and stuff like that. And then I was at a games festival showing off Waking Coma back then. And I ran into that guy who made the original Flash Coma game. And he was like, I have this other game named Coma coming out, like Once Upon a Coma, which was also renamed to something else because that guy also, Thomas Brush, also thought Coma was too common and too overused. So then I changed it to Waking, which I think is kind of a better name because it's the SEO is way better. And then on top of that, it just has like this double meaning of sort of like waking to these, to appreciating life and the things in your life. And it's just, it describes the situation in more of like an uplifting way. So, I'm really happy that sort of happened.
Yeah, I can see that. Coma being, as a noun, the issue that the player is fighting against, what they're trying to overcome, whereas Waking is the goal, it's what they're striving towards. So that does strike me as more positive.
Right.
You also said that a lot of games are developed by people who have undergone something and the game is about their own personal experience. Was there some personal experience you had leading up to this game's announcement in 2017 that you're like, this is the kind of game that I want to make?
Yeah, I mean, I can't give you some story about being in a coma. Like
I was wondering.
I mean, I think that all of us have spent, probably, unfortunately, like time in hospital rooms, and I maybe some of us have had like small brushes of life that made us want to re-examine certain things about ourselves. I sort of had one in 2013, but I that was sort of a brush with that inspired this my previous game called Continue 98765432110. So I done a bunch of interviews on that. So I don't, but nevertheless, like those lessons from that game still kind of carry on, and wanting to make that game continue, which is about realizing your mortality and I guess that one is about mortality basically, and this one is more about like appreciating the things in your life. That has carried on. But what I would say about Waking is that, like, as far as like personal experiences, like my background is that I went to art school. I went to the Rhode Island School of Design, and I really loved it there. And I did like a lot of stuff like paintings and illustrations and sort of things like that. And when you have that sort of background and that sort of training, you really there is just like this real emphasis put on trying to create meaning and trying to create this like thing that is not only like beautiful to look at or profound to look at, but also just has this like personal aspect and this meaning behind it, and this thing that just beyond what it is. And transitioning over to games is like, it's a very different medium to work in, because games, like, the main thing that I think people get from them is that they're fun, and or they're like violent, or they're just sort of like addictive. Like, there's some good qualities about them, but there's some more negative qualities about them. And I still want my game to be fun, and there's still action in my game, and hopefully it's addictive enough that you want to play it and not put it down. These are all like these really important aspects of the medium of making games. But in addition to that, like, as I've gotten older, I play these games and I get the gold, or I get the sword, or I get the kill the Dark Lord, and I just think, like, kind of like, so what? Like, none of this means anything. Like, I don't really care. It's, this checking off this checklist of things that you kind of want to achieve. And it's, almost like these sort of mind games that the game is playing with you. And I wanted to make this game that just really had real meaning to it. Like, it was really about like things in your own life, and had some real genuine connection to the player and who they are and what they're doing. That's sort of what I think made me want to create a game like that. And the last piece of the puzzle is the work that I was doing before I got into making indie games professionally was that I used to make video games for ad agencies, like mainly like Flash games and interactive pieces, and like Facebook games, and like, just like these little sort of things mainly for ad agencies. And when you work in interactive media like this, there's always this thing that people at the time were pitching, which was like, make this like experience about the user. Like, don't just make a game that's like, here's like, a bowling version of this, or a, Space Invaders version of that. Like, make it involve the user. So, like, an example would be like, I made this like hotels.com thing, and at the time they had these like claymation characters that were in all the ads, and you could just like make a claymation version of yourself. And like, I don't know who does this stuff. I don't waste my time doing these things, but like hundreds of thousands of people made like little claymation versions of themselves and put them on their Facebook. And that's like a cheesy example of like what interactive media kind of is in the sort of the ad agency world. But there's always this the point of the story is there's always this emphasis on like, it's about the user, it's not about you. And so I noticed that in games there's not a lot of that. There's sort of creating avatars about, creating different like heroes, or there's like some choose your own adventure games in which like your personal way that you would handle a situation goes into it. But there's not a lot about you. And maybe part of the reason why is because games, a big part of it is about escapism, and a big part of it is sort of like tuning out the world and being in this fantasy world, and being this like hero or this power fantasy within this world. But I thought that there was like this really interesting way that I could take all of these things, like the art school mentality and the ad agency stuff, and then combine it in together with this sort of like action oriented game kind of a thing that could come together in this like really unique way. So that's sort of my personal experience is like informing this.
You've gone from making those Flash games for Hotel.com to making this game for the Xbox One. Are you the sole designer and developer for Waking? Did you do all this by yourself?
Yeah, basically,
Wow.
basically who it is it's I developed and designed and came up with the concept, and I do all of the art, and then I have a few freelancers that help me out on the stuff that is like a little bit above my ability. I'm sort of a jack of all trades, but I'm not an expert at things like 3D character modeling. So I have like one freelance 3D character modeler who did all of the models in the game, and then I have an animator who does like maybe like half of the more complex animations in the game, and then a couple like maybe I spent a little bit of money on a couple of very like complex geometric structures and things that are the more sort of like beautiful showboaty kind of like graphically 3D things in the game. But that's it, besides like, hiring musicians and voice actresses and things like that. The whole thing is put together by me. That's why it took 5 years.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I've seen a lot of one-person shops, and usually those games use pixel art or are 2D as opposed to 3D. I can't, off the top of my head, I'm sure they're out there, but I can't think of any other games that use an engine or look as complex as Waking does and really only have one person behind it. That's really impressive. Congratulations.
Thanks. It was really naive of me to think I could get it done in 2 years or 3 years. Yeah. But it's finally here. Yeah.
So we talked about some of your other personal experiences on the road in the last 3 to 5 years. I understand you also experienced some significant loss last year when you lost 2 people close to you. I'm very sorry for that. I can only imagine some of that. How did that inform or shape what you were working on with the game at that time?
Yeah. So in December of 2018, so almost 2019, my father and my girlfriend died in the same month, basically, and it was a hard time. I was really struggling with Waking, and there were a lot of these problems in the background that were like almost destroying the whole project. And then my father died at the beginning of the month, and my girlfriend was there on the night that my father died, and then I basically spent almost like a month just cleaning out his apartment, just throwing away all of his stuff. And then my girlfriend came to visit me, and we had this beautiful week together, and then she went back home, and then a week later she basically passed away. So it was really a hard, trying time, and part of what kind of got me through it was working on this game. And by the time this happened, the game was pretty complete in how far it was really along. But what I would say about that is just that the lessons that I was trying to convey in this game kind of they came through in this hard time for me when you lose people and you go back and you try to picture these beautiful memories that you had with them, and you write down these times that you had with them to sort of solidify that these moments happened, and for example, I remember like with that girlfriend, her name was Sam, like we used to have like these Wednesday date nights, and I would pick her up, and I live in kind of like small town Iowa. So it's very picturesque and very nice, and we would drive down to this pond, sort of on the outskirts of town, and we would sit there and each have a beer, and we would talk about our days, and in front of this pond, Walton Pond, and then it would be just around the sunset, and the sun would set, and there'd be country music softly playing in the background. And I just remember like the way that the sun would reflect off of the water. It would paint everything in like this bluish tone. And I just remember her like curled up in the car seat next to me with a beer and the country music station playing, and just completely painted in these blue tones, and her eyes looking back at me. And we all have like, hopefully in our lives, these little pretty pictures like that, in our brain of like, these like really beautiful moments. And if we don't, I hope that people, whether they play this game or not, are like generally trying to angle their lives in a way in which they can build these memories and they can have these feelings and they can be close to these people that are beautiful, lovely people in the world. And I have similar, memories of my father, of us going up to Maine and falling asleep under a tree, in the sunshine. And I remember, my dad coming home from a party. He wasn't a big drinker, but he was drunk and he was sitting in the living room singing along to Elvis songs. He's like Japanese, so it's like kind of funny. And, I myself, like I come home from a party and I want to sit down and sing along to some of my favorite songs, and something I do too. And, we just have these little ways that we picture the people that we love when we think of them. And I want this game to be like a celebration of those types of moments and memories and things. And the goal is not to get everybody to like, cry or whatever. It's just to hopefully have like this like kind of pretty reflective moment about things. So yeah.
Wow, I'm really moved that you have those memories, that you're able to remember things so positively and just frame your life around those moments. I think for a lot of people, our memories are more often like the Jim Carrey movie Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, where there are things we want to forget as opposed to things we want to cherish. And for some people, they have trauma in their life and they can't forget that as much as they want to. When Waking says your memories are your weapons, that implies that they are your ally. It's something that you can use to your advantage. What about for people for whom memories are a disadvantage?
Generally the way that I think about these things in our lives like that are disadvantage, like, that are sad memories that we're trying to avoid, that we're trying to get rid of, is that I think that the way that a lot of people approach their lives is that there can be things that were like these obstacles they went through, these like traumatic things, or these disadvantages, or these places where, they just have a lot of sadness no matter what. But there is this way in which that shapes us into the people that we are. And for most of us, we are sort of, for our better or worse qualities, we're generally happy to have been shaped by the life that we lived, because even through these hard times, we learn these things that otherwise we might not have realized about ourselves. And this is just sort of the nature of the lives that we live. Like, it is, they are often filled with a lot of things that we'd rather forget. But I think that people in the end, they take a lot of pride in having overcome the things or having gone through the things. They take a lot of pride in having gotten through them and also having the sort of wisdom that comes through overcoming adversity. Basically, the way that I look at that. Generally, the game is a game that celebrates the good things, but there are nods towards some of the more negative aspects of life. There are things where you do address your fears and your personal demons in ways that are not just in combat, but are in questions that the game asks you. An example of a fear that, it might touch on you and it might not touch on you, but an example of a fear would be, you're given a choice between two things that you fear, and then this fear, you choose one, and the fear manifests itself into this sort of giant monstrous creature that attacks you, and you have to sort of overcome it. So an example would be, which do you fear more in your old age, being completely alone or completely impoverished? Or, which do you fear more, like not living up to your parents' expectations or becoming just like your parents? Or which do you regret more, the things that you have done or the things that you haven't done? There's these different ways that the game does explore negativity. Generally, the meditations, like I was talking about before, it is a positive thing. But inevitably, if you do explore these things, you will run into the negative parts. But hopefully, you take it all in for what it was, because it's your story.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that holistic view, and it makes me want to play the game more. And even if I don't, you've already given me a lot to think about. So thank you.
Sure.
there are a lot of options in the game. I saw in the gameplay videos you sent me that you can choose from a lot of different life goals, fears, memories, etc. But there are such a diversity in the world of memories and experiences. So, for example, when you say, your childhood pet or your dog, if you never had a pet, or the thing you remember best about your father, maybe you didn't have a father. How do you offer enough options that everybody can feel represented?
Yeah. I mean, this is like a big part of the challenge, because what I tried to focus on is these universal things that generally everybody has, but there is such a diversity that you're going to run into some problems. There always is some way to, within the game, to basically have a different sort of a thing. So, for example, just practically with a pet, if you'd never had a pet or just any animal that you enjoyed ever, it can be replaced by this childhood toy, which is sort of like this other option. Or it can, I think that the first rung of choices is pets, but if you didn't have a pet, it can be replaced by either like a kid or a niece or a nephew. And if that is not an option, then it can be replaced by a childhood toy. And all of these sort of have like these different powers and these different ways that they work and manifest themselves. The pet and the children is more of like this like thing that fights alongside of you, and the toy is more of like a weapon that you can wield. And in the case of the father, what it is if you didn't have a father or didn't have a mother, you can literally pick like I never had one, or I wasn't close with my father. There's all these sort of options when it asks you like who your father essentially was. And if you pick that you never had a father, you gain what is essentially a melee weapon, which is literally called My Father's Absence. And it is basically kind of like maybe sort of in a sense like you're taking a certain initiative into your own hands with this weapon. But it is, that might not be a positive thing for you, but once again, like it is your story, and it is this way that this thing that you carry along with you that is, I don't know, it is your own thing in its own way. But to elaborate more, besides just telling you what happens if you don't have like a pet or a father, a big part of the challenge is coming up with these like common things that is, part of all of our lives. And what are these questions, and what are these things that can really evoke like thoughts and feelings and sentimental, nostalgic memories. And I just sort of remember sitting around the campfire with some of my friends, kind of being like, well, what about this? Like, what about this? Like, does that mean anything to you? And like, I remember one that people really liked was, maybe I can even ask this of you. Maybe you have an answer, maybe you don't. But like when you were like a kid and you wanted to like get away from everybody. Maybe this is like when you're a kid. Maybe it's like when you're a teenager. Like, where did you go when you wanted to just be like alone for a little while? Like, where was like the place that you escaped to? Was there like this like basement that you had, or was there like an attic or a garage, or was there this patch of woods behind your house that you could go wander in, or was there this lake you could ride your bike down and just sit next to alone for a while? Like, do you have one, Ken, that you can share?
I had no physical space of my own. We were a family of 6 in a very small house, but I would say that I escaped into books.
Okay, there you go. I mean, that is a space to be alone, I suppose. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And, you're given these choices, and that's not one of the choices that you can do, but there's always a custom choice. So no matter what, if it wasn't a garage or an attic or some woods, you can always write custom, and then you can just write, into books, or a book if you had like a favorite book that really helped you escape that you read over and over again. There's always this way that you can customize the answers that you give.
Oh, I like that.
Sure.
And this must make for a very complicated story tree behind the scenes with a lot of different nodes and branches too.
I mean, a lot of the ways that these are affected is it is just sort of like your weapons and things like that. So if you choose an attic or a basement, it doesn't have an effect on the story or anything like that. But that weapon does take on a different form, whether it's like a melee weapon or like some are summoning weapons, or some are, projectile weapons, and then they just take on different colors and shapes. And then, of course, when you go down your list of weapons, it says, whatever it may be, the name of your dog or the name of your girlfriend's, or whoever it may be. That you might say books, the name of your teddy bear. It's all in there in this weapon list that you have. And so as you're scrolling down your weapons in your lists, it's just basically like this list of particulars from your life that are there to help you through this darkness.
That is really cool. I remember another player saying how surreal it was that he was fighting alongside his childhood dog who he hadn't seen in 30 years because he was able to choose the exact breed, gender, and name of his companion in the game, and that showed up, and now he has this dog fighting alongside him. That's such a personal touch. I'm really looking forward to experiencing that myself.
Thanks. And the way that we do it with humans is they are just these sort of like hooded, ethereal looking, sort of bluish, hooded characters. And then there's some variation in body sizes and gender and stuff like that. And then you, of course, are sort of also this like hooded character with, a blackened out face. And then we account for like changes in body shape and gender and everything like that. So that is sort of how you kind of step into the game and how it is. But yeah, for the dogs, it was very annoying because there are so many breeds of dogs, and there had to be like 20 different dogs. There's basically like 3 cats. You have like your skinny cat, your medium cat, and your like fluffy cat. But like dogs, it was like a lot of extra work to get all those dog breeds in there. So
yeah, I've backed a lot of dog shelter simulator games on Kickstarter, and they always have as a reward, we'll add more breeds if we raise more money. I'm like, you'll never have all the breeds. Doesn't matter how much money you raise.
Right.
So there are several points in this game where the screen blacks out and there is an audio narration describing a meditation, like close your eyes, think about this, visualize this. Does that draw on any particular spiritual or philosophical tradition?
So I am not a big meditator, but ironically, I live in this very weird town in Iowa. It's like the transcendental meditation capital of like the country, I think. And there's like these like weird golden domes, and people like twice a day go and meditate in the golden domes. It is kind of weird that like I have this game about meditation. I'm around these people. Maybe it like sort of sunk in a little bit for me. But the story behind how the meditation got into the game was in the original concept of this game. The meditation part wasn't a part of the game. It was basically you would just get to the end of a level and it would ask you questions and it would kind of be the same. But there was no thing where the meditations come on. Basically, what happens when the meditation comes on is, the screen blackens and this very pretty music plays in the background, and this voice actress who is like amazing and did a perfectly beautiful, amazing job with the meditations that I wrote for her comes on, and I have these meditations where I don't just go like, think about this. Like it really tries to like get you to meander into the memory and to slowly kind of explore that world and that memory and that thing and take the time to remember the details. And they're only like a minute or so long, but I think that by the time you hear the words with this perfect music, like if anybody doesn't, I think that like the most perfect part of the way the game came together is these meditations, and I'm really proud of them. And I really think that like a lot of people are really skeptical about like, how do you make this work? It's such a weird idea. The voice acting has to be perfect and the music has to be perfect. And I think the game really nails it. Just to brag a little bit, but the reason why the meditations came into the game is early on in the development of this game, I was pitching it to these people that could potentially give the game funding at ID at Xbox. And I had this presentation put together, and I started the presentation off and I said, like, I want to start the presentation off with this kumbaya moment, is what I called it. And I asked all the people in the room, all of these sort of like indie game console exec types, to just close their eyes. And I took them back through this, with my own voice, this meditation about the pet, a short one. And then I took them back into this meditation about a romantic interest, again, pretty short. And then I had people open their eyes and I asked them questions about their pets or their romantic interests and the names of their pets and things like that. And people really responded to just like that part of the presentation. I think it got a lot of attention for the game early on. Somewhere in the middle of the development, I kind of thought that there was something else missing from exploring these memories, that just having the words appear on the screen in a certain pretty way with some music there didn't quite really work. And the other thing that really wasn't working was, for example, I had like in an early version, I had this memory about like going to school, like, and growing up and going to school. And I had like this 3D school modeled, and it just didn't work because it wasn't your school. And you just would look at this 3D school and you'd be like, well, this is just a school. That's not my school. Like, that doesn't evoke memories really in me. And it kind of got to this thing where it's like, no, the cutscene has to be in the person's brain. And the way that you get the cutscene into the person's brain is by going back and doing what I did in that presentation, which is to actually have the meditations in the game. And that's sort of where that kind of came from.
That's amazing how your actual pitch for the game became part of the game. Yeah. How very cyclical. I love it. Uh-huh. Now, I've read that this game can be described as being for fans of Dark Souls, which is not a very meditative experience in the traditional sense. So how do you blend those meditations you just described with the hardcore frenetic action of Dark Souls?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the thing about trying to elevator pitch somebody is that there's just certain things that you can say that get people to kind of get what the game is a little bit, but the game doesn't have a lot of the more annoying aspects of Dark Souls. It's not a game where you die constantly. It really isn't. And it's not frustratingly, ridiculously hard. It is a third-person game with combat. The combat is somewhat of a challenge, but there's like difficulty level adjustments. Right at the beginning of the game, it asks you like, do you want to play like the Souls version of this game? Or do you want to play like the indie version of the game? Or do you want to play some very, very easy version of the game? You can adjust these difficulty levels all the way through. But when you're sort of pitching a game and it's a third-person combat game, it just ends up being kind of easy to kind of say that. The combat system is really different. It isn't like the dodging and, there is melee in it, but it's more like this weird telekinetic system where it's sort of like the mind. So you're picking things up off the ground with the power of your mind and charging them up and throwing them at people. It's almost like Gambit and X-Men a little bit.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, bigger stuff. And, but there is also like this like combat element in it. And then there's like summons that you have and just straight up like projectiles that you can like shoot out of your hand as you get more powerful. So it is different in that way, but, maybe naively at the beginning, I thought that I could also market this game to Dark Souls people, which is like, as my people at my publisher pointed out, is like really never going to happen. So it's just kind of come along that way. I mean, the sort of pitch is that it's kind of like Dark Souls meets Journey or something like that, but that's just to make it easy in people's brains to kind of understand what's going on.
That makes sense. When you say it's a third-person action game, that sounds generic. When you say Dark Souls, that's specific, and it gives the person a much more concrete idea of what you're aiming for. So that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So in this game, you are a person in a coma, and presumably the action is all taking place in their mind. So what are they fighting against? Who is the enemy when you're in a coma?
Right. So I wanted to come up with like a mythology for like an original sort of unique mythology for who the spirits are that are kind of with you as you're in this coma. And I didn't want it to be based on any already existing mythologies or anything genuinely kind of religious. So I came up with this, the main character, the sort of like Darth Vader of the situation, is this guy Somnus. It's his name. It's just Roman for sleep. But he's sort of like this like giant godlike horned kind of a guy, and he's spooky and everything like that. But really his job is, it's almost like he's like a kind of like a government bureaucrat for like the other side. He's kind of just like, I'm the emissary for death and it's time for you to go. And like, you have to give up and you have to face that it's death. And like, come on, like I have to go. Like, can you just stop resisting? He's almost kind of more like that, perhaps in a slightly more poetic way. And then below him are these sort of minions of him, which are these people called the death counselors. And these are these animal-headed, human-bodied creatures that basically, when they're being nice to you, they're very slowly and poetically trying to say, like, this death is part of life and you have to accept that. And we're here to, like, help you in this very poetic way, accept that. And then when they're not being nice, they're just attacking you and trying to get you to give up. And they're, smashing you with axes and knives and things like that. And they're sort of like the mini bosses of the levels that you go through, as well as just being regular minions that go around. And then sort of below them are these kind of drones that are called sleep keepers, which are these like weird geometric machines that are being built within the psyche of your brain that like mainly like shoot at you. And like, they're just like these sort of like robotic, weird, pretty machines that have been built in your brain that are going to kill you. And then finally, unaffiliated with them are these personal demons that, you're wandering around your brain. So there just are these personal demons in your brain, whatever that may be, which are some of the most powerful and 2 hits and you're dead kind of enemies that you really have to avoid and watch out for and run away from and sometimes kill. That's generally the lineup of who you're trying to face, and they're all just trying to get you to give up and to die instead of wake. So there you go.
I've heard that when people are in comas, they can still hear the people around them and that you should talk to them. Is any of this game based on medical science, or is it more the mythology you've created? There
is some of that. There are parts in the game where, for example, if you win this challenge, one of your loved ones by your side, there's like an animation of them putting their hand into your hand in the hospital bed. And you're just seeing hands, so it could be like anybody, and it can work for you or for anyone that loves you. So, and this hand grasping yours momentarily relieves you of one of the sort of factors that makes the game harder, which is there's like this fear number that rises as you play a level more. The level gets harder and harder, and it's measured by fear. And when you take this loved one's hand in your hand after completing a challenge, your fear completely like lowers back to like a manageable rate, and when I don't think this is too spoiler alerty, but when you get towards the end of the game, you've defeated all these bosses and you've done all these memories and you've accomplished all of these things, and when you unlock the final level, basically it's just manifested in you being able to slightly wiggle one finger. And this is like the life in you being so close and being like so, finally coming back into you, all manifested by this very small movement that I think that people have sort of observed of people coming out of comas or people who are beginning to have consciousness.
Oh, wow.
So things in the game like that kind of allude to some of this medical stuff, but mainly you're in your head.
Yeah, that's really cool. Thank you. So we talked a little bit about Dark Souls and about Journey. I see, or I'm reminded of some of my other favorite games that I've played, and I mean this as a compliment. For example, the person being in a coma reminds me of Epistory, a Steam game I played a few years ago. The way that you are making up your memories or choosing them as you go reminds me of Silent Hill's Shattered Memories. The way that you are crafting yourself by saying what's important to you reminds me of Ultima 4, Quest of the Avatar. These are all wonderful games. Are there other games that you have felt inspired or influenced by in making this game?
As far as like the gameplay mechanics and like the third person thing, like there's definitely a lot of that, but I don't have a lot to really draw upon, and I haven't played any of those games, to be perfectly honest. So I don't have a lot of things to really draw upon to sort of create this meditative and this memory idea. I mean, as I talked about before, like the closest thing that I can kind of come to in my own thing is like the hotels.com like claymation thing. Like I really don't know why this idea hasn't been done. I think that some of the initial reviewers are like, yeah, it's kind of surprising this game hasn't been done yet. But as far as I know, there's sort of nothing like it out there like it. And, part of what I just want to do is make really weird games, and I want to do things that are have the traditional fun stuff in it, but are also have this like really original quality to it, and that is kind of what, for better or worse, I think I've done with Waking, but it's hard for me to really draw upon things that do that. I know that one of my goals was to make a game that a lot of the time with like these deeper games, they do just turn into like these walking simulators, which like I don't even truly enjoy. I have to like admit that I want to see more games that have like the action of like a Skyrim or something like that, or like a Hyper Light Drifter, but they really have like this other aspect of it that is also very profound and deep and interesting. And I mean, Hyper Light Drifter is one of my favorite games. I really like that game, and I feel like I took a lot from that game to some degree, like the way that the combat handles, and to other degrees the way that there is like this looming story about mortality going on in the background. But it's hard to come up with something besides the sort of work that I did before that really reflects the meditative part of it. So
sure. No, and brief tangent, I've had Hyper Light Drifter on my wish list for ages. I think I just moved it up a couple of notches.
Awesome.
So thank you.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
So since you are inspired by your own work, tell me a little bit more about Continue 98765432210. Specifically, what lessons or experiences from making that game informed your experience of making Waking?
It's funny to think about, because that was my first indie game that was like that you didn't play in a browser. Like I made a lot of browser games before that. I made like this game called Skrillex Quest, which is another part of what I used to do. Is I was hired by like musicians to make games for them, and this Skrillex Quest game is sort of like the predecessor to Continue. And I guess with Continue, like it was my first game on Steam, and I look back at it now, and also worked on iOS, and it was just programmed so badly, and I had such ambitions about how much artsiness people could put up with with that game. I don't necessarily recommend it. It's very artsy. It's a little bit like up its own ass. Some people thought it was like a little pretentious, but it's about like mortality, and I sort of like it, but I also know that like, so the lesson that I didn't learn from Continue is like, don't make stuff that's too weird. And Waking has become pretty weird, so I don't know if I've really learned that main lesson. I hope people like it more than Continue. It's definitely like less snobby and more engaging, and the mechanics of the game are way better, and the programming is way better, and the graphics are way better. It's tricky because like back when Continue came out in like 2013, and it was a totally different indie market. Like the degree of attention you could get for any indie game that was like halfway decent was huge, and now there are just so many infinitesimally more indie games that it is just so hard to like get any attention on anything. And I don't know if I'll even sell as many copies of Waking as I did as Continue, like, which did okay, but it's a little bit heartbreaking to look at it in that sense. But as I said, like the main lesson that I could really take away from it is that like, just make weird stuff and don't make it too weird, and hope that people like put up with your weirdness and keep trying to be weird, because it's good. So yeah.
Well, I think weird is good. I think a lot of gamers do, and I think they'll find things to like about Waking. One more question. You talked a little bit about ID at Xbox. Do you want to talk about how your relationship with Tiny Build came about?
Yeah, I could also talk about the ID at Xbox thing, because the game is funded. After all of those like weird meditations I made everybody take, the game did get funding. It started out, I did this game that I mentioned before called Skrillex Quest, and someone at ID just really thought it was great, and they're just like, hey, come to GDC and pitch us a game. And I had no concept whatsoever. And I came up with some version of this game, and some version of this pitch, and I did the meditations, and people were like, that was really interesting. Let's have them do it to a few more people. So I kept having to do this presentation over and over and over again to like different people. It was almost like a year of doing this presentation to people, and it just really, at the beginning they're like, there's like a 1% chance like we'll actually like fund the game, but like you just like do a presentation and we'll give you feedback, and like like you can learn from the experience or whatever. But after all of this time presenting it, they were like, I think we're going to hire a studio to make this game. And I was like, okay, a whole studio. And it was going to be this like multi-million-dollar project. And I was just like, what just happened? Like, how did this happen? Like, this is great. Like, this is everything I ever wanted, I think. And then some things sort of got shook up and some things got moved around. And like, I went to the studio. It was actually like the studio called Minority Media in Canada. And they made Papo and Yo and some other games. And there's like this like very crazy guy named Vander, who is like what used to be like the main guy there. And I had to go up to Canada, and he like took me under his wing. And it was literally like when like Luke goes to Dagobah and like Yoda is like trying to teach him the Jedi tricks, and he's like disappointed in him and doesn't think that Luke knows what he's talking about. And he's like swatting at him with his cane, and like Luke is like screwing up, and it was just so like that. This very, very smart, very crazy guy, just sort of like really kind of giving me the works, and like really like, just just acting like that. So it was going to be like this whole thing, and then the powers that be just decided like, okay, well, like, we're just going to give you like a little bit of money to do it by yourself, because we're not going to do this whole big investment into the game after all. So at the time I was living in New York, and I basically just quit my job doing ad agency stuff. I had like a little business, and I just moved to this small town in Iowa and just kind of started making the game. And, there's just enough money to live like very meekly and very like, humbly for 5 years to get it kind of done. So that was kind of the story behind that. And then as the game kind of came to be, I really wanted a publisher, because the marketing world for indie games it's really bad. It's really hard. It's really terrible. And I just wanted somebody to kind of hold my hand. So I reached out to a lot of publishers, and Tiny Build was the most enthusiastic about, the game. It's like a really different game than a lot of their games, and they're sort of like trying out new things. But I think that, one of the owners of Tiny Build said that the meditation about the pet made him cry about his pet, which I guess he just felt very moved by that. And he gave me this chance to work with them. And so we've been working together for a while, and we have like some people with PR that are helping out. So it seems like it's going to be at least okay. So that's kind of how that came about.
Well, that's great. And they themselves have published some unusual games like Hello Neighbor and
Right.
Speedrunners and Party Hard. So
Yeah.
this seems like a good fit.
I suppose so. I think that a lot of their games are like, I guess I would say that like tonally they're more like funny and like goofy and like but so I thought that this like very serious game about like all this stuff was like kind of a weird fit. And they're also usually tend to be kind of like more like this game is like more like processor intensive, and there's they tend to make like kind of smaller games, like more pixely games and stuff like that. But they're trying out new things. They have this other game named Hellpoint, which is like a total Dark Souls game. So it's just an expansion of things to see what works, and that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Well, I think that's great. I think you have a great team, by which I mean the developer and designer being you. You have funding from ID at Xbox, you have a publisher with Tiny Build, and you have a great game coming out on Steam and Xbox One on Thursday, June 18th, 2020. Is there anything else about Waking that we didn't get to talk about in the last hour that you want our listeners to know?
I don't think so. Just it's just a little celebration of the dumb little lives that we live, and I hope you like it. That's all.
And where can they find Waking online?
Right now, wakinggame.com. And then, we have social media of all sorts, and YouTube channel, and there'll be some new videos coming up soon. There's going to be like a making of coming up soon, and some sample gameplays and things like that. So right now until the 18th, that's pretty much what we have. Yeah.
Excellent. I will include links to all of those in the show notes found at polygamer.net. Jason Oda, thank you so much for your time. It's been an honor.
Thank you for having me.
This has been Polygamer, a Gamebits production. Find more episodes, read our blog, or send feedback at polygamer.net.